to start. I hope you can all hear me okay in the room and online. David, if you have any problems, just let us know. Good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to the Institute of International Relations. We're here today to discuss the issue of the Houthis and the Red Sea crisis. We're now entering the 6th month since the Houthis attack started in the Red Sea. By today, there have been at least 60 occasions on which commercial or naval vessels have been attacked by the Houthis. 2 seafarers have already been killed, 17 have been taken hostage and remain in captivity since November last year. The Red Sea crisis has given rise to legal, political, economic, and even environmental questions that we will seek to explore and address today through our discussion. Before we start, I will just provide some very brief information and background into the discussion in order to set the scene of the discussion. So the first question is, who are the Houthis? So the Houthis are an armed group that control most part of Yemen, including the capital Sana'a, and northern and western areas close to Saudi Arabia. Houthis rose to prominence in 2014 when they rebelled against the government and forced it to step down. Since then, Yemen has faced a decade-long civil war that has caused one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. What led to the situation in the Red Sea, to the Red Sea crisis? The Houthis are aligned with Iran and are backed by Iran. It is hard to deny that the Houthis have acquired weapons of the latest technology from Iran. Houthis have claimed that the attacks against the vessels are a response to Israel's bombardment of Gaza and of the failure of the international community to put an end to it. But I think that it now becomes clear that the Houthis have tried to exploit the crisis in order to promote their own political agendas and interests. And I think this became even more evident following the agreement they made with China and Russia. Why does this crisis merit our attention? Well, for several reasons. The decision of the US and the UK to launch strikes against Houthis on land, as well as the launch of the EU Operation Aspides, have raised questions about the interpretation and application of international law in response to threats originating from non-state actors and are directed against non-state targets, in this case, commercial vessels. What legal tools do we have to deal with this crisis? UN officials have highlighted that ceasefire and peace efforts in Yemen have been undermined by the current situation and as Houthis gain more and more power. This has raised an alarm about the future of the country and about regional stability at a time that tension keeps escalating in the region, especially following the attack from Iran against Israel and Israel's response. How does the Red Sea crisis affect regional stability? What more should we expect? Will there be more reactions from the Arab states or other countries in the region? Concerns have emerged concerning the economic impact of the crisis. The Suez Canal is a global strategic waterway that enables the crossing of 10% of global seaborne trade. It primarily connects the European and the Asian markets. The Houthi attacks have forced vessels to divert their routes all around the Cape of Good Hope, increasing their journey by almost 12 days, driving up the operational cost for the shipping industry. This new crisis comes after the COVID-19 pandemic, the challenges posed to the trade by the war in Ukraine, the collapse of the Baltimore Bridge, and a drought that forced the authorities in Panama to restrict crossings through the Panama Canal. Is the shipping industry prepared to deal with these ongoing challenges? And who's going to pay all of these extra costs at the end of the day? In addition, longer journeys have derailed the efforts of the International Maritime Organization to restrict ship emissions, while the sinking of vessels by Houthi missiles may cause a severe environmental damage to the environment with knock-on effects on fishing, food security, and the economic stability of the countries in the region. Reduced shipping through the Suez Canal may put Egypt under further economic strain, but might open up more opportunities, commercial opportunities for African countries and their ports. For Greece, the matter is of extreme relevance, primarily because of the Greek shipping interests. For example, Lloyd's list reported that 17% of the ships tracked passing Bab el Mandeb only in March 2024 is of Greek ownership. Greece has taken a leading role in the EU Naval Forces Operation Aspides by assuming the onshore command of the operation. But is this enough? Will these steps tackle the problem effectively? These and more questions will be addressed through our discussion today by the excellent panel of discussants we have with us. But before I give the floor to them, I would like to invite Rear Admiral Christos Kondorouchas, Hellenic Coast Guard Coordinator, to provide his own introductory remarks in the discussion. We haven't brought
I said that the factual background is more or less known to all, so I will not expand on this. And the political background was very clearly given by Mrs. Galani. I will stress that we all know that the international community has made great efforts to secure freedom of shipping through multilateral and bilateral instruments for many years, and to a very large extent, we were successful in this. This enabled shipping to become one of the strongest enablers for economic prosperity the last 50 years. Perhaps it's the first time that we witness politically motivated attacks of such scale against shipping post-World War II. But at times were times of world-scale war operations. The last months, we have witnessed a disruption, if not a catalysis, of the rule of law at sea. This itself cannot but have serious repercussions from all perspectives: geopolitical, legal, commercial, environmental, and we look forward to hear the valuable insights of the distinguished speakers from those points. The need to restore international legal order is imperative, even in this irrational situation. That's why it was very soon felt that only military action could produce tangible results. From the side of the shipping industry, we have closely followed the situation from the very first moment, relaying all available information and providing recommendations to our shipping community, in parallel, of course, to the recommendation issued by the industry organizations. At national level, we provided the necessary political and practical support to our Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Defense at the time the critical decisions on the country's operational involvement were taken. At the international level, we have provided our strong support to all decisions and resolutions at the level of the United Nations and the UN organs such as the International Maritime Organization. And we have in mid-May a significant meeting of the organization's Maritime Safety Committee, which is co-chaired by the Hellenic Coast Guard representative, where new resolutions on the Red Sea crisis will hopefully be adopted. Such resolutions may not be providing the much-awaited permanent solution to the problem, but still they provide the necessary political backing for further decisive actions, including the indication of steps that need to be taken for this purpose. For sure, I shouldn't take more time from the distinguished panel. It's just to express myself what actually everybody hopes, that very soon those illegal, unjustifiable, and horrific for our seafarers and shipping attacks come to an end. Although I'm confident that shipping will again prove to be resilient enough to overcome even an undesired short prolongation, as it did on all recent big crises of the pandemic and the Russian war against Ukraine. And until that time, the discussion implications will shed light on why and how the international community should continue to closely follow the situation and act accordingly. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your comments as well. Thank you for bringing up the operational issues that we're going to discuss in more detail. I would like now to turn to our speakers, but before I give the floor to them, I ought to introduce them. I will start clockwise, so I will start with Mr. Chris Fragu, who is a journalist and analyst covering a broad spectrum of issues from politics to business and from international affairs to economic policy. He has worked as a business editor and foreign affairs reporter for more than 20 years for various print and online publications and served as managing director. Currently, he holds the position of the Director of Intelligence for the Crisis Monitor website. Mrs. Diana Topaloglou has started her career in the marine sector at a very early age, viewing shipping from the insurance side, the ship owning side, and the broking side. She has served as a general manager of Allied Insurance Brokers in Piraeus for almost 20 years and established Orion International Brokers and Consultants Limited in 2009 that deals, among others, with marine insurance and claims and collaborates with all major international insurance markets worldwide. Next is Mr. Spyros Tarasis, Vice Chairman of the Management Committee of Intercargo, the International Association of Dry Cargo Ship Owners. He's been elected to this position back-to-back since October 2018. His career includes 33 years in shipping, during which he held several managerial positions, including for Costamare Bulker Fleet, the Olympic Vision Maritime, and Springfield Shipping of the Onassis Group. Commodore of the Hellenic Navy, Panagiotis Sergis, now retired, served on board various units of the Hellenic Fleet as well as the Hellenic Navy General Staff. He performed the duties of the legal advisor to the first commander of the EU Operation Atalanta and participated in the drafting of the operation plan of the EU Operation Aspides. In June 2024, Panagiotis will join the team of the Office of Legal Affairs of SHAPE NATO. Good luck with that, Panagiotis. We also have Dr. David Goddard online with us, who is a legal advisor at the UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, where he's a member of the Ocean and Overseas Territories team, working mainly on the law of the sea and polar issues. Before joining the Foreign Office, he served as a lawyer in the UK Royal Navy, advising on a wide range of military operations at sea and on land. And finally, we'll have with us Andrew Norris, who hasn't joined yet because he's in the United States and the time difference did not permit for him to join at this time of the day. Andrew Norris is a retired U.S. Coast Guard captain who served for 22 years as a U.S. Coast Guard lawyer and 4 years as a surface warfare qualified Navy officer. While in the U.S. Navy, he participated in Operation Earnest Whale, the reflagging and escort of Kuwaiti tankers to maintain freedom of navigation through the Persian Gulf during the Iran-Iraq War. He currently works as a maritime legal consultant, principally in support of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime Global Maritime Crime Program. So we're very lucky and very privileged to have a great and excellent line of speakers. So I would like to start our discussion now by starting with you, David. I would like the first part of the discussion to focus on the legal issues and the legal perspectives, the legal questions that arise out of the operations in the region. So, David, I would like to ask you, why did the US and the UK opt for such a robust response that included online strikes? There has been a lot of discussion around the legality of this operation, and I was wondering whether you could briefly talk us through the legal basis of this operation. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Sophia, and thank you so much for inviting me to join such an interesting discussion about an extremely important and serious set of issues. I should just add, as you said, I work for the UK Foreign Office, and I'll try to explain things from a UK government perspective. But ultimately, my contributions are my own, particularly where I'm filling in the gaps between what has been said publicly. So why did the US and UK opt for such a robust response? Well, I think the answer to that is really found in your introduction. The response is to such a scale and persistence of threat which has been posed by the attacks on Red Sea shipping that the only response suitable is one that is as robust as has been taken by the US and UK, I think, and along with a number of other partners, albeit that they didn't participate necessarily in the strikes on land. We've seen attacks from unmanned aerial vehicles, small boat missiles, including the historic, I think, first use of anti-ship ballistic missiles against merchant vessels at sea. That's, of course, I think, most importantly, placed a really significant risk to the lives of seafarers, and it's of course caused major disruption to a vital trade route. I think in the UK's communications around this, we've referred to nearly 15% of global seaborne trade passing through the Red Sea, including about 8% of the global grain trade, 12% of seaborne traded oil, and 8% of the world's liquefied natural gas trade. The diversion that the attacks have caused adds significant cost, weeks of delay to the delivery of goods, and that ultimately, as well as affecting or having an economic impact, it jeopardizes the movement of critical food and fuel, which has an impact on the provision of humanitarian assistance, including to Yemen itself. And that's been met by repeated condemnation and warnings from the international community, including warnings endorsed by the Security Council. So I think it's clear that presence alone has proven insufficient to counter the threat from the Houthi to shipping in the Red Sea, and hence the need to consider striking on land. I do think that it's important to separate out and distinguish different aspects of the response. So you've spoken about the EU's response, and I know there'll be contributions that focus on that. I think that sits alongside Operation Prosperity Guardian in the maritime presence, deterrence, and reassurance space. And that is distinct from the targeted strikes against Houthi targets in Yemen conducted by the US and UK with the support of a number of other states. Operation Prosperity Guardian as a presence operation is really based on rights found in UNCLOS. The warships that are present are exercising their normal navigational rights and exercising their inherent right to self-defense against drones, missiles directed towards them. And there may well be some discussion around how that fits into conceptions of state self-defense. But I think you can see how the US and the UK understand that question from the absence of any Article 51 letters submitted in relation to the attacks intercepted by vessels acting as part of that presence operation. In very clear contrast, it's clear that the US and UK's basis for the strikes on Houthi targets in Yemen is rooted in Article 51, and that's made clear by the letters submitted by both states to the Security Council. I think the US has submitted a letter, and the UK has submitted two letters setting out the measures taken based on our rights under Article 51. And specifically in the UK letters, you see a reference in the first to the attack on HMS Diamond, a Royal Navy warship, which had just taken place before the first set of strikes on land. But also, and I think this is critical, both letters refer to the ongoing threat to British ships, so ships sailing under the UK flag. And I think if you're looking for the core of the justification, I think that's where you will find it. It's the ongoing threat to ships sailing under the UK flag. And there are obviously some controversial points in there. Questions around self-defense against a non-state actor, self-defense in relation to threats against flagged shipping. And we can maybe pick up some of those questions as we go along. But I think it's clear from the Article 51 letters where the UK at least says the legal basis for those strikes on land comes from. Thanks.
Thank you very much, David, for clarifying these points for us. I mean, for those of you who might not have a legal background here, the discussion is that what are we really dealing with? Is it piracy? Is it self-defense? Is it a classic scenario that you have terrorists and you have to deal with terrorists? Is it an UNCLOS scenario where you just promote freedom of navigation? It's complex, and I'm sure there will be questions at the end as well. But I would like to turn to Panagiotis to ask him about the EU response. So we saw that the EU chose not to align itself with the US-led operation. It launched its own operation, the EU Operation Aspides, that was launched in February 2024. And I would like to ask you, Panagiotis, to explain to us why is it different in terms of its aims, its legal basis? Why different? Why?
Yeah, many thanks for the kind invitation. Actually, just a small caveat to begin with. I represent only myself here. I don't represent the Hellenic Navy, nor, of course, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, for which I'm going to work from June. Actually, as you correctly not pointed out, but I think you tried to say to us, it doesn't make any operational logic to have two identical operations, because both the US and UK operation and the EUNAVFOR Operation Aspides are defensive in nature. So they have an overlapping, let's say, mandate. But I personally think, and it is clear in the public statements, EU wanted to dissociate from specific acts that were conducted by US and UK that in some member states' view seem to be escalatory. Although, as David said, the strikes on land were not conducted under the naval operation, but it was another separate operation launched, which was called Poseidon Archer. Actually, you know, it's a very thin line to separate the two operations in the perspectives of many member states and regional actors. The operations, because they were conducted by the same, more or less, nations, coincided. So this escalatory approach, it was not acceptable by some nations like France or even Greece. And although at the beginning they were willing to join the US-led operation in the Red Sea, they dissociated themselves after the strikes, and the strikes were conducted 18th of January, and just after the strikes on land against Houthis, the decision of the Council came to launch a separate operation, which is more palatable to most of the EU states. Actually, apart from that, there is also another operational reason. When you participate from the beginning in the operation, you don't just plug in, so you can only put national caveats in the ROEs. Actually, you have a red card or a green card to specific provisions of the OPLAN and the ROE, and the ROEs matter. So this gives more latitude to more states to be willing to participate in the operation. So that's why I think we had two separate operations. Of course, everything in the, let's say, public parlance is dressed under, you know, the motto of strategic autonomy of EU, which for me, it's a desirable end state, but it's very difficult to achieve.
Thank you, Panagiotis. We're talking about defensive operations for the benefit of freedom of navigation. David, I would like to come back to you and ask you about the impact of the maritime autonomous vehicles, including drones, on what we know. I mean, we've been discussing this for years. You writing in academic settings as well. We have discussed these issues before, but now we're actually seeing these things happening in practice. They use maritime autonomous vehicles. The Houthis use drones to attack vessels. And the question is, how does this new technology now affect what we know about, again, the interpretation, application of the law about the naval operations and everything that happens on the ground? And just to highlight that we're talking about a non-state group that uses this technology.
Yeah, thank you. It's a really interesting area of inquiry, and as you say, Sophia, it's a set of issues that we've grappled with for many years, both from the perspective of contemplating adversaries using these devices, but also working out how we can deploy them ourselves. And there is no competent armed force that isn't investigating this technology for its own use. So we come at this from a number of directions. I think first and foremost, before you get to the law, there is a practical challenge. These sorts of devices require us to develop new tactics, techniques, and procedures that are capable of addressing a new threat. And I think from the perspective of the sailors, the mariners sat on vessel subject to that threat, that's probably the most important thing in this setting, that we have the impractical tools to defeat novel threats. And I think it's not just a case of tackling the technology itself. It's working out how the legal frameworks and the doctrinal frameworks for tackling those threats are affected by the fact that we have these devices that have nobody on board. And to some extent, I think that latter challenge diminishes if the threat posed by an autonomous vehicle device is immediate and obvious. In that case, if there is a boat sailing straight towards you with nobody on board it, then it's a very technical question about making sure that you have the right means to neutralize that threat. But I think the challenge is perhaps less straightforward if the threat is less immediate and less obvious, and there's a greater legal and doctrinal dimension to that challenge. As you've alluded to, there are still unsettled questions around classification, how we separate these devices out into classification as vessels, as weapons, as devices, and the associated questions that raises around their rights and immunities. The rights and immunities of an object are different if it is a vessel capable of enjoying its own sort of freedoms of navigation versus some sort of lesser device or weapon that might not. Alongside questions around issues such as state immunity or immunity of government property. So without sort of hoping to be able to answer all those questions, I think it just I think the point is to emphasize the layered complexity that these novel devices present us, and that complexity complicates the interaction between naval vessels and these unmanned systems. I think one particular area that is complicated is the established escalation model that navies typically use to deal with threats. When dealing with manned vessels, there is a very well established, judicially approved model for escalating through the use of force. You use warnings, you use warning shots, you use non-disabling fire against a vessel, and only then do you move to disabling fire and the sort of violence that might lead to the destruction of a vessel. That's clearly inappropriate on a number of levels when you're dealing with an unmanned system, both because the steps that model envisages are unlikely to be effective. Warnings directed towards an unmanned vessel might be effective if it has a microphone and a way of communicating those warnings back to a sort of home base, but probably not. But more fundamentally, the considerations that lead to the necessity of those steps are unlikely to be applicable when no humans are present. So we need to have a different model for the use of force when we're considering an unmanned vessel. I think a separate, quite interesting issue that it raises is that the availability of unmanned vehicles, particularly to non-state actors, means that it's more likely, I think, that we will see attacks, as we've seen in the Red Sea, launched from land. And that means there is no need or less need to commit limited human resource to attacks, and I think that might make it harder to tackle threats effectively at sea. And I think in turn that may lead to a greater necessity or a more frequent necessity to address threats on land rather than being able to do so at sea. And that, of course, carries with it all of the attendant practical and legal challenges that we're talking about today when it comes to striking on land. Not just the question of credible legal basis for doing so, but also questions around attribution, for example, which can sometimes be particularly difficult to establish in the case of unmanned systems launched from land. So sorry for not having any great answers, but really just to emphasize the complexity that this adds to the situation. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you, David. Actually, each one of these questions could be, a topic for a separate event. We need more time to address these complex issues. But I got one quick question for you. Mr. Kodur has mentioned the UN Security Council resolution, and he highlighted the importance and the political backing that it offers for these operations. But I was wondering whether you think that the resolution offers any legal leverage as well, because we didn't see the Security Council being very open about what needs to be done in practice.
Actually, Sophia, I doubt it, and I doubt it a lot. Although, as David said in the communication of both states, US and UK, and also in the drafting directions of the OPLANs and the ROEs of EUNAVFOR Aspides, it was clear that we use the 2722 Security Council resolution as the legal basis. Actually, personally, I doubt that this is the correct approach, because we have a lot of unresolved issues regarding this resolution. First, it is not a Chapter 7 resolution. Secondly, the resolution actually refers to the right of member states to defend their vessels. And what defend connotes is a matter of interpretation, which is a very difficult issue. Actually, when the Security Council refers to self-defense, it says that explicitly. But both EU and the US-led coalition actually want to interpret defense as self-defense, actually embracing also the defense of merchant vessels and foreign flagged merchant vessels, which are very difficult legal questions. Actually, the famous resolution of the General Assembly 3314 points towards the different direction. actually attack on a single merchant vessel does not qualify it as an act of aggression. So actually we are moving actually in uncharted waters in this legal reasoning, but it was clear, I am well aware of the Council's decision regarding the drafting of the OPLAN and the ROEs. We have excluded all other relevant or more legally sound, let's say, legal basis. We have excluded piracy. We have excluded the SUA Convention, the suppression of unlawful acts. And of course, we are not willing to accept, especially this applies to the US and UK forces for political reasons, I think, that we are involved in an international armed conflict operation. So actually, it is a trend that we see self-defense is used as a panacea, actually, to legalize any action at sea.
Thank you, David. Sorry, you know, the crazy lawyers here are really struggling to find the right legal basis in order for the commercial vessels to be protected effectively. It's not easy at all. Experience, we have naval operations, and you see, we're trying to protect commercial vessels, but are there really any channels of communication between the naval operations and the shipping industry? I mean, is it easy for ship owners or people working in the shipping industry to actually communicate and get an idea of what happens on the ground?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me and Intercargo to this discussion. We are the International Association of Dry Bulk Ship Owners. We represent the dry cargo fleet, around 3,300 ships and 150 companies all over the world. Shipping in general, to take you out a little bit of the legal discussion in the war zone, shipping in general is the most efficient in all aspects transportation of goods around the globe. More efficient than road transportation, than rail transportation, than air transportation, making it possible for needed products to go to their destination as soon as possible in the most economical way. And we support the financial growth and the prosperity of the world economies. By the way, yes, the hits were more than 120, according to our last count. And who is going to pay for all this? You and me and the taxpayers. So there's no question about that. The last two attacks were today, this morning. So after 2 weeks of silence. Shipping tries and so far succeeds to adapt instantly and constantly to new regulations, sanctions, restrictions imposed by geopolitical events, finds a way taking into account any risks involved to keep ships and cargoes moving. And if actually this can be achieved, it is achieved. The economic aftermath of any conflict or for closing of the Suez Canal or from the recent accident of the Baltimore Bridge that closed the port. You read it in the press, you know how big it is. So this is what we are going to pay. Now, coming back to your question, we constantly are in contact with naval operations, and we have channel of communications in the region of the Red Sea, and not only the Red Sea, to ensure maritime security and safety. We stay informed about the situation on the ground by many sources, and we take necessary precautions. We talk with maritime security alert systems provided by international organizations or the naval forces, Combined Maritime Force, CMF, EUNAVFOR Operation Atalanta, as well as the weekly reports from the Joint Maritime Information Center, which is highly informative and up to date on a weekly basis. We have notices to mariners issued by maritime authorities. We communicate with naval task forces and coalition forces in the region when we are scheduled to pass from a conflict area. We have the Maritime Domain Awareness Network, which is an information sharing platform where we get some information from. And the Maritime Security Center of the Horn of Africa, which is used for many other, like piracy, other security reasons in the area. And we keep constantly updated on anything that happens on the ground. It is vital for us to secure our people on board, to secure our ships, to secure the cargoes. But although the information we gather is useful and up to date, there are classified information from countries that they never reach us, expected actions in a war zone, for example, that are kept secret. And we are aware and we are puzzled also from regular GPS jamming in the area, which is more than common nowadays. If you take into account that I landed in Cyprus last week and my Google Maps showed that I was in Lebanon, you can imagine how big it is for the ships that they travel the area. So all this is something that it develops instantly, and we need to be very well on the spot anytime for this to pass through. It's not easy, but we try to keep informed as much as we can.
Thank you, Spiro. Actually, I wasn't aware of all these channels of communication between the shipping industry and the naval forces, so it's great to hear that these actually exist. You have already brought up the economic implications of this crisis, so I would like to turn to this issue a bit more now. And Chris, I would like to turn to you and ask you to tell us a bit more about the economic implication of the crisis, both in terms of on the region, the impact on the region, but generally on the supply chains as well.
Thank you for having me also. Good morning to everyone. As the previous speakers pointed out, the consequences are vast, but shipping industry has been adapting rapidly to all stresses that come around. So this war in the Middle East was long awaited. Since the 40s, the shipping industry has been living under a constant threat of war in the Middle East. Now we have it. So, in many aspects, the shipping industry was ready for that. And that proved to be right because they adapted both in the shipping routes, they changed routes, and the impact was only in the cost mostly and in the delays, but they adapted also financially. They used the financial markets to diversify and to keep the costs down. That's why, while the costs of at sea, both insurance and gas has gone up, we have not seen that in terms of final prices at the store. IMF has said that the impact is very low on inflation, but that's not the only measure we use, the only gauge. There are many gauges of logistics that we can use to say that there is an impact. Western economies keep running. This is not the case for the economies around the war zone. Israel economy has not kept running. Has gone down 20% only in the last quarter of 2023, and projections are not good. Egypt economy was at the brink of IMF, and now they are in the IMF program. There is not many things you can say about the other countries that were already in a disaster scenario. The economic consequences there cannot be predicted. People are living in the Stone Age, and will go further back. And that means that it will be vastly radicalized, and consequences will be even higher in the future. But in the act, what we say, the actual consequences are three. Egypt is going under. Israel, who wished to play a world role as an LNG exporter, is going back. this is not happening, and LNG will be scarce. This will be a consequence felt by the Western economies in the next 18 months. Because even if and when the war there ends, the consequences will stay. And the risk uptick that we see now will be well vested in the prices. So that this is the consequence for Israel and the West economies that are connected with Israel, and we're expecting LNG output. This is not the only one. Saudi Arabia was trying to diversify away from fuel to a green economy, the new economy, let's say, not green. Saudi Arabia and green in the same sentence. They are not going either, because they do not have good relations with their neighborhood at the time. And this is pushing everything back for at least six to 12 months. In world economy, in geoeconomics, as we say, this is a vast amount of time under which many things will change. We cannot predict the changes now because military operations are ongoing. So when military operations are ongoing, nobody can predict with safety what will happen when they will end, what will be the scenery, what would be the catastrophe that we will have to handle. Events are not catastrophic, they are stressful right now. But as war continues and Israel keeps invading Gaza and Houthis keeps targeting vessels, nobody can say what will be the outcome. Let's say everybody said that how many ships there were targeted until now, 70, 100, 150. Our count is that only 2 or 4 of those vessels were tankers. The other vessels were bulk carriers, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. Yeah, I have a count of 2 or 3, but it's very low. So we do not have a disruption per se at what we call the oil industry or the gas industry, but the overall optics of the war force companies to change routes, and force countries to be more aware, and the risks come into prices. Insurance prices went up for about 400% in the beginning of the crisis, and then they came back to 200%, let's say. The insurance cost got to 0.25 and it went up to 2%, and now it's about 1% of the vessel's value, I think, if I'm not mistaken. This is a volatility that the industry was expecting, and the markets were expecting. That's why you didn't see a so robust reaction in the stock markets. It was just for some days. Volatility, and the markets were very anxious. But this is what you saw. The shipping industry and the world as a whole adapted very quickly. Now we will have to see what will happen after the war, because during the war, the consequences for the markets were not so harsh. The stress will continue.
Thank you, Chris. I think you have highlighted some important issues that I hope that Ioanna will be able to answer us, because she has all of this experience, all of these years in the marine insurance industry. So first of all, do you agree, Ioanna, was the shipping industry prepared for this crisis or not? And I mean, from your experience, do you see this crisis as something unprecedented, or is it just another crisis for the shipping industry and just business as usual?
Certainly the impact has been felt in the shipping community, as the Red Sea is a vital route for vessels that trade with it towards the Far East. We spoke about bulkers and tankers and containers, but also the cruise industry has been affected very badly, and all the cruises towards the Far East have been canceled for 2024. Maybe they will start again in 2025. As Mr. Franco said, Greek ship owners adapt very quickly. We have this ability as Greeks to adapt very quickly in new circumstances. And of course, I think that with the right negotiations between owners, charters, shippers, receivers, solutions were found. And trading continues uninterrupted, whether it's through the Cape or whether it's through the Red Sea. In my life, insurance-wise, I've seen many crises. We saw the crisis back in the 80s with the Iran-Iraq war. We saw ships being detained, sank, bombed, trapped, whatever. Still, trading continued. So I cannot say, we also saw the Russian invasion into Ukraine. I cannot say that that we faced something unprecedented in the Red Sea. Having faced all this crisis before, shipping can adapt. So in today's environment, I think nothing comes as a surprise. We don't know what's going to happen. So solutions are there. They are difficult, but they are there.
I may continue with your analysis on what happens with the marine insurance premiums. I mean, they have increased, right? But I mean, should we expect more increases? And again, the question, I mean, Spiro said we're going to pay at the end of the day. Is that the case? Who's going to pay all of these extra costs for these new crises?
Well, marine insurance premiums in the Red Sea were rather low. They picked up a bit when the whole issue started. At the moment, they are well below 1. They are at 0.3. They're low. They are stable. Owners get some rebates, so things are stable. And I hope that they will remain stable unless we see something unexpected, something, another, let's say, invasion of the Iranians towards Israelis, or the Israelis doing something crazy. We don't know. But at the moment, things are stable. Underwriters are careful. They are looking at every aspect. Don't forget that the Red Sea has other countries which might create problems. We've got Ethiopia that doesn't have an exit into the sea, which they might at a certain point decide that they want to make some sort of a movement. We've got a lot of nations there that are not very, their governments and their ways of thinking and their appetite is different. What we see is that when underwriters quote for war rates in the Red Sea, they also ask for KNR insurances, which means that pirates have opened up their appetite again in attacking ships. But what we have to suggest to our owners is that when they buy KNR insurance, it's very important that they also ask to include in the KNR insurances terrorism and illegal detention, because these two aspects are not covered under the KNR insurances. When we had KNR, when we had pirates, the first thing that the negotiator was saying when he was negotiating with the shipping company was, "We're not pirates. We're not terrorists. We are dealing with, have come here for humanitarian reasons, and we're here to help, but we are not terrorists. And always, in order to pay the ransom, we had to get the approval of the Bank of England. So now the Houthis are terrorists. So we have to be very careful when we deal with this type of insurances. New things coming up.
Thank you, Joanna. If you could just switch your microphone to
Yes, sir.
facilitate the sound. Thank you very much. The KNR, for those who might not know, is the Kidnap and Ransom Insurance. Great. And this takes us very nicely to the next question that I have for Spiros, that concerns the protection of the seafarers. I mean, during the COVID-19 pandemic, the impact that it had on the seafarers became a very hot topic for discussion. And for the first time, people started realizing how difficult it is to be a seafarer and what you deal with. And we saw a lot of seafarers leaving the profession as well, if I'm not mistaken. And now we're having another crisis, and we have deaths, and we have injuries, and we have terrorists, and states might actually block ransom payments because the Houthis have been listed as a terrorist organization. So the question is, has the shipping industry taken steps to protect the seafarers? Is that enough? I mean, should the international community be doing more to protect seafarers? What could we do? What should we do?
Let me try to elaborate on this. Well, I will take you on a cruise. Like Joanna said, the shipping profession in the old days was considered to be a job that made you travel around the world with a higher than the land salary, enabling you to explore the world, traveling, visiting different parts. It was attractive to people that they could not afford it. That's why we have the last, decades, 1,500,000 seafarers all around the world. And on top of that, working with ship owners that provided assurance, insurance, health and care and training, it was very easy to go and do that. Unfortunately, recent events and since piracy started, maybe 10 years ago, I don't remember, and also facing different implementation of rules in each country the vessel visits, and each government had its own perspective about the rules and the interpretation of the rules, and the increased risks from the conflicts, Red Sea, Ukraine, Russia, Iran lately, they board ships and they kidnap ships with the crew all together. It's very difficult now to find crew that they are willing to risk their lives or strand themselves on board a floating object that is targeted by all of these pirates, missiles, land-based port state police controls, for any reason. And in most cases, the ship owner and any authority, global authority, are not able to help them. And this is the important thing. Recently, in IMO, in the Facilitation Committee, last week, the delegation of the Philippines informed that following Houthi attacks on ships and the tragic loss of the 2 Philippine seafarers, the Philippine authorities and manning agents were going to further limit the deployment of Philippine seafarers to ships sailing through non-global hotspots. They will have the option to refuse to sail, and they will have the option to get a repatriation and compensation. So you see, it's becoming more and more difficult. During the pandemic, which was a great learning experience for shipping to adapt to these situations, the shipping adopted steps to protect the seafarers. Health and safety protocols, personal protective equipment, facilitating crew changes when it was not possible, even offering mental health to people stranded on board. However, we had travel restrictions worldwide, crew changes not being possible, and we had very limited access to medical care in most of the cases on board the ships. So you see, whatever measure we take, it all comes to the local government, to the local country, how they are going to interpret it and how they are going to facilitate it. Although IMO and the international community, they issued guidance. Seafarers are priority essential workers, traveling with ships and transporting material that is needed. Only a few countries and governments actually allowed them to do so, especially in the first 6-8 months, resulting in people stranded on board for 8 months, for 12 months on board, with no medical care and with no supplies sometimes. And that was very, very, very difficult situation that we as shipping companies faced and the people on board faced. I will tell you only one thing. Back in 2021, a cook with a dental problem on board the vessel, it took 1.5 months to arrange doctor ashore, and it cost $38,000. $38,000, and he ended up with a massive infection in his mouth because nobody could attend him. Just a simple thing that we all consider it to be very, very normal in our lives. They don't have it, especially in periods of crisis. Now, how the shipping industry protect seafarers. We have risk assessment. We conduct a thorough risk assessment to identify potential threats and hazards in every area and in the Red Sea and in the Black Sea. This helps us develop appropriate mitigation strategies. We take security measures, onboard security personnel, security drills, security equipment to deter and respond to security threats. But due to the nature of attacks, drones, sometimes boarding of military personnel on board and taking the vessel. These measures that we take seem inadequate to cope with the current situation. The information sharing that we discussed before, we try to utilize information sharing platforms and take all the information that we can from the relevant authorities. We have the best management practices. We have come to the best management practices 5 regarding piracy. But is this enough now? I don't think it's enough. We have to revise that also. Another important issue. We saw now during the incident in Baltimore, is the global network of salvage resources adequate? Because we have incidents. We are used so far to have less and less incidents every year, and that makes it for salvage companies and salvage resources to draw back. That means that if a case happens that we have a massive incident, pollution or collision, it will be maybe the salvage resources so far are inadequate to cope with the situation. You see how long it will take for the Baltimore port to open. So every aspect of the infrastructure around shipping should be ready to address incidents and should be ready to address problems. We collaborate with authorities, we collaborate with naval forces, we train the crew, and we prepare the crew for every situation that they are going to face. Security awareness, emergency response procedures, measures to take in case of an incident. We try to stay vigilant. We aim to protect the seafarers because actually these are the assets we have on board, the people. But whatever we do, whatever IMO rules, it all comes to the hands of the independent governments and the countries to implement it, interpret it, or not. Studies show that the crew happiness index is constantly falling, especially the last 6 months. We try to get the highest authorities involved in every aspect of this, but it is difficult. If you know, last week, there was a joint industry open letter that has been sent to the United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Gutierrez, regarding shipping and the incident of the kidnapping of a vessel in Iran and the seafarers that are held hostages on board. I will just read you one thing. The world would be outraged from the letter. The world would be outraged if 4 airliners were seized and held hostage with innocent souls on board. Regrettably, there does not seem to be the same response or concern for the 4 commercial vessels and their crews that being held hostage right now. And if you ask the public, nobody knows. Would we expect the international community to do more? Yes. We have humanitarian considerations. Seafarers play a crucial role in the global trade, and they are essential workers, and they deserve protection and support. We have to ensure the safety and the health and the safety of the seafarers and the well-being of the seafarers. Otherwise, we cannot maintain safe, efficient maritime operations. We have to consider their mental health condition because they are isolated on a floating object. And of course, any mental situation is getting bigger in isolation, and especially in circumstances during crisis. And we have the legal obligations also. There are international conventions, there are international regulations, MLC, Maritime Labor Convention, and they all require the protection of the seafarers. What is it? We need to get out of words and paper, and we need to go into action. We either protect them or we leave them. And if we leave them, we're not going to find seafarers to work on our ships in the next years. And imagine the world trade stopping.
Thank you, Spiros. Well, we should highlight that the largest number of seafarers comes from the Philippines, right? So the fact that they're
a big number of maybe 50%.
So the fact that they're reacting.
But there are not only the Philippines. There are Indians, there are Ukrainians and Russians that they are missing right now from the crew complement. So yes, it's a big problem right now to find seafarers that they are willing to go there, and the time that we need to train them in order to be safe during our operations also is very important.
I know, and I agree, because if one reads the United Nations Security Council resolution, you will see that they always make this reference, crews should be protected or seafarers should be released, but this is never enough. And they did exactly the same during the peak of piracy, where they had some references to seafarers without calling for any specific action, which is the problems that you highlighted in practice. I would like to turn to a different issue right now that has to do with environmental concerns. And we saw that among the many attacks, there was an attack against the bulk carrier, the Rubimar, which eventually sank. And the result was a large oil spill and the release of ammonium fertilizers into the sea. So this is another complication. There might be damage to the environment, which might have a further impact on the economy of the regional coastal communities and the region in general. So Chris, what do you think about this problem?
Environmental damage will be done. How local communities will react to that is an issue. I need to remind you that the ship that was sunk, all the countries around declined help to draw it out. They did not accept the owner's ship that was sent to drag the other one out due to internal policy problems, and that they fear that this would result to a much bigger catastrophe. Now, the communities around the shipwreck, as we say, will be impacted. Fishing is one of the things. Tourism is another. And they are outside the world system of relief. They will not get any relief for all these things, like it would happen in Crete. If it would happen in Greece or in any other European country, there will be measures in place. There are not. The United Nations can do so much. The other countries will not help. They have indicated that they will not do anything. So we are talking about a potential planet black hole there. This will be a huge spill. Insurance companies may pay for some of the damage. But again, we are talking about governments that are not stable, countries that are always at the brink. So even if somebody pours money there, there will be no money going to the people that actually are affected by the catastrophe. So this will lead to immigration and radicalization of the people. So we have multi-aspect consequences that we have seen in the past and are always discounted by everybody because they do not represent the highest problem at the time and always get forgotten and get left behind for somebody else to deal with them. This is a very big problem, and I do not know the legal aspects of that very clearly, but I know the geopolitical, economic aspects that we have seen again, and I think that we will be left with a black hole and a very big catastrophe, and nobody has predicted how many people will be affected from that.
Yes, it's not small questions because the crisis is still pretty much ongoing. So we'll have to wait and see how things will develop. If I may ask you, Chris, just switch that off. Do we have Andrew online? No. Okay, if you, I mean, there's still some more questions, but if you have questions, please go ahead.
My name is Inoa Fentouli, and I am the Executive Director of the Institute of International Relations. Thank you all for this very interesting discussion. Maritime security is not exactly my field of interest, but security at large was my field of interest for more than 20 years as I served at NATO headquarters in Brussels. And what I could identify as a difference between today's crisis and the past, and I would like your views on this, is that in the past, the shipping industry in general was very reluctant to have any international interference in their business affairs. I mean, they were not looking at having security organizations involved in the protection of the shipping lanes, of the trade, and so on. And now we see a difference between the time of piracy, let's say, Horn of Africa crisis, etc., and the current crisis. And this is interesting, I mean, how would you see the perspective of this operation? Because this is maybe it is a multinational operation, but it's certainly not a big operation in the sense of military operations undertaken by NATO or EU, etc. So maybe we can see the perspectives of this involvement, let's say, and the entanglement between international organizations or coalition of the willing, as it is now, UK, US, so on, and an EU operation, the Aspides, and how it affects the shipping industry.
If there's someone who would like to respond to that, have any comments? Panagiotis?
I feel that looking at the conflict dynamics in the region and the entrenched instability that we have there, I think it is that naval operations, purely naval operations, and what Ino said, and also Spiros, we are looking for more, but what kind of more action? Actually, I feel that naval operations alone cannot do much in such situations. Why it's like trying to police the whole France with 2 police cars, something like that, because we are speaking about vast oceans, and we are all living, especially the Western world, in a time, in an era of limited naval resources. So we are not, as nations, willing to pay a lot to have big navies as we had, let's say, 20 years ago. Although it seems that this atmosphere is changing now, but still we are very unwilling as Western countries to dedicate a lot of our GDPs to our military forces. So I feel that purely naval operations are having a contribution. We had today that the Greek unit actually destroyed 1 unmanned vehicle targeting a merchant vessel, but they cannot be a solution to all the problems we are facing. And actually, Houthis are advancing now their own political cause, as Sophia said, by presenting themselves as protecting Palestinians against Israel and Western crusaders. So they are using this as a pretext. They are advancing their political cause, which offers them legitimacy, let's say. And they are able to recruit more people from the local population, and of course to find allies across the region. And this makes situation even worse. I don't feel that we can have a viable solution without political solution in the problems we are facing in the region.
Well, in my view, the difference between the old, let's say, conflicts between Iraq war in the 80s, 90s, or even the Black Sea region is that there we had the declared war. And there it was decided, for example, in the Black Sea, by the 3 forces there to protect the vessels going in and out of the corridor. There were things that were discussed and decided, and there were forces that were protecting from all the parties involved, that they were protecting the grain corridor, as we call it. Back in the 80s, 90s, there was a war. Everybody knew that if they would go there, there was a war around. But now with the Houthis, it's a total different thing. There is no war there. There's just a group that is targeting merchant vessels. So we need to address it somehow. It's not piracy.
Sorry, to intervene again. The Houthis are there for ages because the Houthis are fighting the Saudi Arabians. It's not a new phenomenon, but still, it's a very limited group. it's not, I mean, the Houthis that are a big power, I mean, that you cannot just eliminate the international community. And certainly, I mean, I don't expect the shipping community to wish a militarized shipping. I mean, it would be impossible to protect militarily the whole shipping operations across the world.
The wish is to have a free commute of merchandise, and this is what shipping needs to protect the assets and the people that are passing through an area which is actually a no conflict area officially, and this is all.
Conflict area. First of all, because of Yemen. I mean, it is a conflict area. And then there is the Gaza war. It's not that there is no war, there is a war. Yeah, the concept. Yeah.
Let's say blackmail or terrorist kids, whatever the passing by. Sometimes selectively saying that no, they are going to leave the Russians. And sometimes.
If this is profitable, it's easy to have 5 kinds of foods, let's say, across the world. So they have to be eliminated.
Overlook Japan as well. So it's not that they operate on their own. So I'm not sure how easy it is to just eliminate them. David, I'm not sure, are you able to follow the discussion? I was wondering whether you have any views on the matter. I mean, is this response enough? I mean, we have multinational operations, we have different operations. Will that be enough, or should we deal with the Houthis problem in a different way?
I didn't catch absolutely all of the conversation just now, but I think it is definitely difficult to see how the threat to shipping can be dealt with solely through presence at sea. I think for the reasons that have been set out, and I remember the point about 2 police cars protecting the whole of France from the when we were tackling piracy coming from Somalia, and in that case we were dealing with a much less sophisticated threat. We were there was considerably more investment in terms of assets to the operation, and still protecting shipping successfully was extremely difficult, given the support that the Houthis have, the strength of their position within Yemen. It's extremely difficult to see how a response purely at sea can provide the sort of assurance that the shipping industry needs. I think clearly that's what led the US and UK to strikes on land, and clearly the view was that the presence at sea wasn't enough. But I think it would be naive to think that even that is a long-term solution to the problem. And it was quite clear that those strikes were intended to have a relatively short-term effect. I think absolutely the solution, the long-term solution to the problem, has to lie in a wider process that results in a stable Yemen that does not have the presence of the Houthis in it, or certainly not in a position of power. And of course, as soon as you look at the Houthis, you have to look at their sources of funding, and their sources of wider influence. So yeah, I think the operations like Prosperity Guardian, the other presence operations, are important as a short-term mitigation. And I think the strikes on land, clearly the UK's position is that they were a justified and important contribution to trying to provide relatively short-term stability. But in the long term, the issues spread much further than the corridor of water in the Red Sea.
Thank you, David. I mean, it also depends on how we understand short term, because I mean, the operations in the Gulf of Aden lasted for years, and as soon as they discontinued their mandate, then piracy started taking place again. So everything is, I mean, we need the naval operations. And yeah, I mean,
well, I maybe just to come back in on that. My reflection, having been quite involved in the counter piracy operations in the Indian Ocean. I think ultimately there was a relatively successful result in significantly reducing, if not completely eliminating the threat of piracy from Somalia. And a component of that success, I think, was the naval presence in the region. But I think it would be naive to think that it was merely the presence of warships that led to that success. It was a much more comprehensive approach that involved an awful lot of investment, for example, from the shipping industry in hardening itself, in investing in the measures that ultimately led to a breaking of the piracy business model. And even within the realms of the naval operation countering piracy, it wasn't merely focused on having ships at sea. It was also the intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance operations to understand where piracy was emanating from, having the situational awareness such that you could allocate your assets most effectively to go and deal with those threats, and also enabling that through the access provided under Security Council resolution authorization with the cooperation of Somalia's transitional government. So the reason that navies could get to the coast in Somalia was because there was a significant political initiative in ensuring that access was provided. So a complex problem needs a complex, multi-layered response, and I think the same has to be true here.
Are there any other questions? Yanni?
I have some comments on what has been addressed so far. First of all, I should say that there is quite an interesting policy paper that was published, I think, around January by Professor Akis Papastavridis of the Athens School of Law and the University of Oxford concerning the international legal status of these attacks. And it seems that this is part of the discussion. I think this paper has quite a comprehensive view. And not surprisingly, the conclusion is not entirely clear, except to say that it is quite a full standard deviation or two away from what you would define as a war or a conflict, and maybe even further standard deviations away from legitimizing invading and taking out the Houthis or bombing them into the Stone Age or whatever people think is a clever idea. In fact, the conclusion was that that was likely to legitimate the Houthis and then having a right to attack the vessels of flags of the kinds of countries that would have bombed them, whereas now this right is still debatable. So I think this is probably required reading for anyone that's trying to address this. Secondly, I think the presence of the navies, of the world navies there, and obviously it's not just the EU or the US Navy that's there. There's Chinese vessels, Indian vessels. Recently, I read somewhere, did not read again, I don't have the satellite images. There are also Russian vessels there. In my opinion, probably if you add up the cost of all those vessels there, it's probably more expensive than the cost of deviation. So, I mean, to the world economy. So it's obvious that those vessels, since they're not there to bomb or invade the Houthis, since they are costing more money than they are saving, they are obviously not there to protect either the seafarers or the freedom of navigation. We also know they cannot create a kind of iron dome around all the vessels flowing, even if they were to follow in a convoy, which would make it an easier thing to defend. So they are there just to project power. So basically we have a situation which unfortunately shipping is caught in the midst of, but is basically giving the opportunity to expand the various proxy wars or projections of power that are part of the broader rebalancing of the world around new poles. The flexing of muscle of the Indian Navy, which we have seen for the first time, Indian commandos, you barely even see it. Even their movies are against violence. This has only to do with the Chinese. It's got nothing to do with anything else. I'm very glad to hear that the Filipino administration is protecting its citizens. I think only state actors are respected when you come to international situations. You cannot expect, individual companies to do that job. And I think the Philippines are considering that they might have other problems coming their way as well. So again, they are projecting power. So I think that, a peaceful process like carrying goods is now caught in the midst of a much bigger frame. And I think like Spiro said, and he was at EUNAVFOR when we produced this paper, invited. I think that although it's lamentable, there's not much to be done by the shipping companies except, to press for the acknowledgement. In the initial stages, the shipping industry was afraid to address the issue because it would be considered, politicized. It would be considered on whose side are they? It was coming on the back of the Russian sanctions and the circumventing by some ownership groups of the sanctions, and this made them even more cautious about saying things that might upset. Also, you should realize that although there are top-line rules, like the sanctions or concerning the Red Sea, there are also, from the same places, circumvention mechanisms that are, encouraged. For instance, carrying the Russian oil to India was encouraged by the US. It was 2.2 million barrels per day would shift the price of oil, just as the US is pressuring Ukraine not to bomb the Russian distilleries. So it's a bit complicated what exactly the target is. I think definitely freedom of navigation is one of the targets, but I don't think it's the only target. Making the OBOR a bit more difficult might be one of the reasons. Certainly complicating the Ukraine-Russian conflict by adding the Gaza Strip and then the Iranian potential is part of complicating issues. I think that we need for more shoes to fall off these two legs until we know where we stand. So, thanks for that.
Mr. Trifilis. Well, we have the pleasure of having the author of the paper in the room. But before I turn to you, Dr. Papastapridis, I wanted a reaction from Ioanna and Spiros. Is the shipping industry really politicized? Are the responses politicized? Did you really take into account what the people might think about whose side you take by responding to the crisis?
I don't think that happens. I consider shipping to be like taxis. We are the drivers. You are the passenger. We carry goods from one part of the world to the other. We engage in contractual relationship with many, the shippers, the charters, the receivers, and this is quite clear. I mean, we don't get to choose our passenger like the taxi drivers do. So this is we cannot be political. Shipping is not political. Shipping has to work worldwide and be able to travel worldwide and work worldwide. We are puzzled by sanctions. Yes, when sanctions are imposed, we need to understand them. We need to really clearly define them and try to avoid them. Yes, we need to do that. But up to this, nothing political.
There are ships to move around to make money. Sometimes they close their eyes, but nothing political.
First part of the discussion, but since you wrote that excellent paper, we were also wondering whether you could give us some thoughts, remarks, reflections, whatever you think appropriate.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, because you don't believe in self-defense.
And especially what's changed since then, because that, you know, you've now had a lot of time to study things since you wrote that paper. It was right at the beginning.
Yeah, that's true. So many thanks, Sophia and Edis for inviting me here. It's a beautiful place. I really enjoyed it. And sorry, apologies for not being the first part. I don't know what you have discussed. Okay, yeah, but good. Also, where's my friend Andy? I miss him. Anyways, and good to see David. I haven't seen you for a while. I don't want to reiterate replicate what I wrote in the paper, and still it's work in progress. Because I'm trying to write another paper following up on what happened, you know, in these months. I think that what is interesting, and I would like also to ask people like Panayotis, who were you know, part of the Operation Aspides, is the following. I think that we have now two different operations, or let's say three different operations. To me, one operation is on land, what happens between US and United Kingdom against Houthis based on land, which is, according to the US and United Kingdom letter to the Security Council, this is our right of self-defense, which is, you know, with all due respect, David, I think it is the UK view on you know, on all the non-state actors, on self-defense against non-state actors. However, there are certain, you know, controversies that lies in it, and you know, whether, in my view, this will be better if United Kingdom or United States had obtained the consent of the lawful, legitimate government of Yemen, and you know, exercise what we call usually, you know, intervention upon invitation, that we have the invitation of the you know, the lawful government, and you have the right to you know, to try to somehow quash the opposition, right? Anyways, so this is one thing, is what happens on land, which is self-defense. I won't say this because Pedro doesn't like this. Again, I have some doubts on the legality of this operation. This Operation Prosperity Guardian, which combines both, I think, the land domain, the land dimension and the sea dimension, and Aspides. Aspides, according to the EU Council decision, and I think the rest with it's a defensive operation, right? So it is only defensive operation at sea, which is also in line with the Security Council resolution. I don't know if you refer to this resolution 2772. I think is the number. 22, sorry, yes, 2722 of 14th of January, if I'm not mistaken, of 2024, where this resolution is very explicit in stating that it acknowledges the right of states. Of course, it deplores the, you know, the attacks of Houthis against the freedom of navigation. It recognizes the freedom of navigation, and it takes note, if my memory doesn't fail me, I'm becoming older, takes note of the right of states, flag state, to defend their own vessels in accordance with the national law, which is very interesting. in accordance with the national law, I think it puts everything in a specific frame, which is what you are allowed to do under the law of the sea and under the national law at sea. So in my view, there are two things you can do. And we discussed this also in Tokyo, remember, Sophia. The first thing I think is what the US is calling, and what is, I don't know, what the Greek, for example, rules of engagement coined this or describes this, is the units of defense or on the spots of defense. So I have a missile, coming to a US warship, of course, it will be decided by the US warship. I don't think there is anybody who will say, yeah, you have to wait until the missile comes, hits you, and then find who is responsible for that. So the units of defense, I think, is something we can think as lawful. Now, the second thing is, how do you protect vessels, right, under international law? And in my view, it's very clear that this rests within the flag state jurisdiction, Article 92 of UN Convention Law of the Sea, that all states, all flag states, have the right to exercise both prescriptive and enforcement jurisdiction over their vessels, and also within this remit to take defensive measures to protect their vessels. In the same vein, Greece, as other flag state, use private armed guards, right, on board of the vessel that they are passing through the area. So in my view, there's no legal issue when as frigates as Hydra or Spetses or Psara, whatever, is protecting a Greek flagged vessel in the region. Now, the question is, what about the other vessels, right? So, and here comes my question to you, specifically, Panagiotis. How you protect a Panamanian, a Mongolian flagged vessel, right? Which is not your vessel, right? Because the Security Council resolution is very clear. You have the right to defend your own national vessels, right? So in my view, the only way is that you somehow, the flag states have given consent to, or authorized, or given permission to the, let's say, frigate Psara to actually defend their vessels. And this could be easier in the context of European Union, because all the EU member states have been together. But I don't know how this happens for other vessels. So this is my question. I think that there will be no problem in terms of international law if, let's say, Panama has consented when it passes through the Red Sea to the United States, United Kingdom, Greece, France, to protect their vessels. This, I think, it's a lawful right that the flag state grants, confers to another state. But that said, and I'll close with that one. We discussed this also, Sophia, you remember, in Tokyo, is what happens. The interesting thing is what happens next. So what happens if someone is arrested? So if there is an attack by boats, right? Because now with the UAVs and with the drone, with the missiles, it's easier. But if someone is arrested, will we treat them as pirates? Will we exercise the jurisdiction under the SUA Convention, which is again applicable, right? I think this is something which I don't know if EU has made any thoughts about on the rules of engagement. So this is my very brief comments, and my questions to you, and many thanks for the invitation.
Actually, based on the experience of both Atalanta and now in the drafting, let's say, of the upland phase of Aspides, there is a totally different approach. Actually, now in this operation, in EUNAVFOR Aspides, EU, I think, strived to avoid any jurisdiction, enforcement of penal jurisdiction of arrested persons. So in the ROEs, it is explicitly stated, but this comes from the Council, because all potential legal bases for that are excluded in the directive of the Council to begin the planning of the operation. Actually, SUA or piracy are excluded, actually in not legally, in accordance with my understanding, legally sound reasons. For example, they say that they don't qualify as piracy because there are no private ends. Or they say that SUA Convention is not applicable because the threats to the ship do not emanate from inside the shipping. So, but for me, it's a clear, yes, yes, but for me, it's a clear, let's say, political decision not to go for enforcement of penal jurisdiction. So we are not speaking about detainees, whereas in the piracy context, it was totally different. We were looking to detain, we were trying to reach regional actors to bring these people into justice and have a proper legal ending. Here, we are not speaking about this approach.
David, what will the UK do if you encounter Houthis and you have to arrest them? Will you arrest them? Are you going to bring them back to the UK to try them?
I think of all the possibilities, that is probably the least the least likely. I think, like the EU, I should say that the way that Prosperity Guardian will work as part of CMF is that it's a much looser coalition in that individual states, I think, would have to decide upon the course to take. There's no sort of political body along the same lines as the EU has provided and provided under Atalanta in respect of piracy to agree its own transfer agreements, blah blah blah. Under CMF, I think individual states would have to make those decisions. I'm very much sort of giving my own view as to what is likely to happen. I think a judicial outcome is likely to be a distraction from the work that will actually reduce the threat. Even in the case of piracy, I was always a little bit skeptical as ultimately what the effect was of arresting and prosecuting individual pirates. I think the reason that you prosecute pirates is because they've committed crimes, not because it's likely to have any long-term effect on the supply of pirates. And I think the same is likely to be true of Houthis. I think there would be a very difficult situation if an individual was apprehended having done something where it was truly unconscionable for them not to be prosecuted. I think that would be the most difficult situation where it would offend consciousness to offend conscience not to prosecute them in some way, but it would be extremely difficult. And there will be reluctance on the part of, I think, any of the Western states to prosecute individuals on their own territory because of the consequences that has in terms of any subsequent removal and the prospect of concluding any sort of transfer agreement is complicated by all the factors that I think everyone will be familiar with around human rights and the sorts of assurances that you would have to make that possible. And I do think there are legal challenges as well. I think you would have to look at the circumstances to work out whether you really could characterize a particular act as piracy or a crime potentially under SUA. I think piracy is complicated. I think it would test some difficult questions around the definition of piracy. I think the private ends one is a really interesting one. I don't think I would want to commit myself either way, but given what we know about Iranian control, for example, over the Houthis, I think that further complicates the private ends question. I know some have suggested that the way of working out whether an act is for private ends and therefore whether it's piracy is whether it's cannot be attributed to a state. So I think you would at least have to inquire into the question of state attribution of any Houthi activities if you were to decide on whether a particular act was piracy or not. So to me, as someone who would be, I expect, asked to try and unravel that situation if it happens, it sounds horribly complicated and therefore one that we really would rather didn't happen. As I say, I'm not convinced a prosecution would really have a significant effect on the things that really matter to the ship sailing through the Red Sea.
Thank you, Dave. Are there any other questions? Arietta, I know you've worked on these issues. Do you have any reflections, any comments? I mean, Arietta is from the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Greece. Any Greek reflections on the matters, on the legal matters? Would you like to react, respond? I mean, my reaction is, I mean, what you're saying is absolutely right. My only concern is that, escalating the situation there in order to eliminate the Houthis somehow, it might be even more dangerous for shipping. That's my only concern. But I mean, there are obviously different perspectives, but.
Actually, I believe that it's impossible to eliminate the Houthis because the history shows and demonstrates that such kind of movements are very resilient. And speaking about elimination of the threat, it's, I think, unacceptable. The elimination of the Houthis, I feel it is impossible. Look at what happened in the Taliban. For example, the Saudis actually had an air campaign, the Saudi-led coalition, against the Houthis. And the Houthis were able to preserve themselves. So that's why I doubt that even the US-UK approach, of course, it's a mitigation measure, actually targeting on land, but it cannot offer, let's say, lasting solution because the Houthis know how to protect themselves from aerial campaigns. So I feel that it's impossible to eliminate the Houthis. We have to live with the problem and find solutions, mitigating solutions to address what's happening now in the Red Sea.
When I got this, just a question as we're going towards the end of discussion. I will try to find something positive about the whole situation. I was reading a very interesting article yesterday about the potential of the African ports to take advantage of the situation, and if they somehow manage to improve their infrastructure, that we could see more ports in the region and all around Africa to taking up the opportunity. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I was even reading about Mozambique and how the country could actually exploit this opportunity to improve port infrastructures and respond to these crises. I mean, from your experience, Chris, Ioannis, how possible do you think that actually the African ports will respond to the demands of increased maritime traffic?
Needs time. Because their infrastructure is not that good, and then they have to have the infrastructure for bunkering, for provisions. I think it needs time. It's not something that can be done from day one to day two.
About the transpolar routes. I mean, how possible that is? I mean, is that an opportunity now for Russia to promote these sea routes? I mean, as much as it is possible, given that there is still ice in the region.
Russia will promote the route, and it's taking advantage of things to do so, and it was doing it even before that. Yeah, but Africa is a whole other case because African countries may develop their ports, but the Westerners do not need to know how they will do it because they will do it with Chinese money. And this will open a whole new, different thing of danger there. That's why the US will not call for Chinese support in the sea routes in the Red Sea. The Chinese are there, as you said, and they have communicated through back channels that they are available to send their ships under US command operations even. But the US will not call upon them to help. Neither will do with the Indians. That's how fragmented is the whole system there. It's exactly that. The ship owners do not want to see politics, but it's all about politics. Because if they want about politics, we would have a solution in Yemen. Okay, we have more dead in Yemen than we have in Gaza every day from the bombardments. They prevail, the Houthis prevail, and they prevail because the Westerners do not want in any way to come in contact with the Chinese and the Indians and the other powers, the Filipinos even, in the area, and to agree in a common accepted naval route for the vessels, because they do not want the Chinese to take advantage of that and forward their exports. And we are talking, and we are in the most crucial point of that negotiation, because nowadays Blinken is, I think, in China, and he's negotiating the routes. Chinese can provide security because they have the massive fleet needed to secure the Red Sea, and when the Chinese come in the game, the Iranians will back off. It's that simple. The Chinese can offer that in the table. I do not know if there is any player in the West that would take that offer, though. And as this continues, the Russians will keep pushing and melting the ice in the Arctic route, and not only melting the ice, they have sent up there a mobile nuclear station, a ship, a nuclear station in a ship that has been staged up in the Arctic route in order to provide port support to the vessels traveling around. And we are seeing that Russians are developing the Arctic route as the Africa should do. And the West will be forced by the circumstances to accept the Russian help and take the Arctic route eventually. In order.
Very bad for ship. Then shipping will get political.
Exactly.
If you use the North route and cut out the ton miles of the rest of the world, that's a huge threat to us.
Because EU, at the end of the day, EU is all about money, not about politics.
You're being recorded. Right. Because it is lunchtime, are there any other questions? Okay, I would just like to invite the speakers to just give a final key takeaway. I mean, a final remark about the discussion we had and going forward. I mean, what do we need to bear in mind? What are the opportunities, the risks, whatever you would like to summarize at the end of this discussion. Panagiotis, would you like to go first?
One short comment at the end, that we are facing a rapid militarization of the whole region. For example, 20 years back, we had only France in Djibouti. Now we are having US. We are actually, last year an agreement was signed between Russia and Sudan for a port state. Japanese have also a base, a logistic base in Djibouti, Chinese also. So we are witnessing this kind of militarization, which actually highlights the significance of the region and how difficult it's going to be to solve politically the problems.
David, any final comments, remarks?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for a really rich, interesting discussion. It's always really useful, particularly for us to hear from industry and those who are sort of closest to the consequences of what's happening out there. I think my main takeaway from this is just reflecting on the complexity of protecting shared interests, freedom of navigation and the interests that depend on freedom of navigation, and the sort of complication that complexity adds both to the legal analysis and the need to think multilaterally. The points that Akis, for example, makes around protecting vessels sailing under other flags, and that I think is ultimately a manifestation of this challenge of protecting shared interests and the sometimes uneasy fit of the law to those situations. So, and I think we might not necessarily agree with Axel's conclusions on some of those problems, but I think we absolutely understand, or we appreciate them, and they give us a lot of cause to scratch our heads when we're working out how best to respond to these situations. And I think just the final thought is, given the shared interests that are being protected, it really underlines the need to think and act multilaterally in the maritime space. I think it's very difficult for individual states to make much of a difference on their own. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Ioana, any final comments, thoughts?
I think that we're all going through uncharted waters. We are all relying on what the big superpowers have in the back of their mind. We don't know that. We know that we have elections in the US, and we don't know who is going to be the new resident of the White House and how he perceives matters. So, and we also have a big industry of the weapon manufacturers who love to sell weapons and to make money. So I think it's going to be very interesting time, but not that good for people.
Ioana. Chris, do you have any final comments, remarks, as we're summing up the discussion?
She opened a very nice subject, the US elections and how this will play out for Europe shipping and many, but it's a whole different topic. I think that what both Mr. Sergis and Mrs. Tarassi said about how shipping perceives itself and how it provides security for its people and its vessels, and what Ioana said about how shipping insurance works is the key to answer many questions going forward. Markets, as I said in the beginning, are always adapting, and shipping is a market. What we do not see is what Ino was here and said something, that people now, shippers now say they want international intervention, where in the past they didn't want it. Yes, they want it, but there is no political intervention now. Nobody wants to intervene actually. So whether the shippers want it or not, we see that Aspides and the other operations do most, I think, of their muscle projection, nothing more. 150 ships have been stricken. So we do not have an actual thing that these operations have achieved. They have increased the risk, and the risk of a direct war, and this is read by the market. The market thinks that when the West intervenes somewhere, we are going to have a war. And this is what Wall Street projects. Okay, Wall Street projects that if Biden gets reelected and the Gaza crisis keeps going, we will have war. If Trump, this is not me, okay, this is Wall Street and Moody's, and if Trump gets reelected, we will not have a new war there. This is how the Wall Street plays the odds there. This is how Wall Street plays the odds, and markets have a long tradition in getting it right.
Thank you, Chris. Spiros, last but not least, your final remarks to conclude the discussion for today.
Just two lines. Shipping has proved resilient all this time, and it will continue to prove resilient. It is essential to the world economy. People that work in shipping are under international law. That means they should be better protected worldwide. Laws and guidance exist. They should be followed.
Thank you, Spiros. Right. I would like to thank all the speakers and you, David, online, and thank you to everyone who came to participate in the discussion today. I'm not a great fan of this, but I will do it now. A round of applause, please, for the speakers. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, David.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Take care, David. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks. Bye.